All right, here's the deal. In the Torah, in fact, in the entirety of Tanakh, there is no mention of a voluntary abortion. Now, you may think that that's because it's a modern procedure that wasn't available then. Well, that's not true. There's a lot of evidence from other writings, from other cultures, that during the biblical period, there was the procedure as a voluntary abortion, obviously not in a sophisticated way, was practiced, and it was available, and this was known. It was a reality. In fact, the Zohar, when it speaks about the Jewish people in Mitzrayim, it points out that one of the interesting Mesiras Nefesh things that happened when the Yidden were in Mitzrayim is that although there was a gzera that all baby boys are going to be killed, so when a couple got pregnant, so maybe you would say, why should we go through this entire tzara? So let's abort. So the Zohar says that one of the big schusim that Am Yisrael had is that there wasn't one Jew, that's the Lashon, there wasn't one Jew who made that cheshbon. Of course, we know that Amram and Yocheved separated from themselves and they didn't have relations because they didn't want to have children, so that concept happened. But the idea that they would abort, that didn't happen at the time, despite the fact that there could have been some justification. So obviously what the Zohar is saying, and this is, we know this from other places as well, is that it was an option. Abortion always was an option, which therefore makes it a little surprising that there's no regulation in the Torah, there's no statement in the Torah about yes, no, maybe, nothing, there's no discussion. And that is going to be one reason why there's an element of confusion about this topic, or at least, should we say later, as we're going to soon see, a machlokes. Okay, but we do have in the Torah one reference to an abortion, an involuntary abortion. This is in Parshas Mishpatim. And this is the only time the Torah, the entire Tanakh, where it talks about an involuntary abortion. And so therefore, by studying this passage well, we can hopefully gain something about understanding what is the status of the fetus in Jewish law and how are we supposed to understand the concept of abortion. Before we begin, I'm just going to give one disclaimer, and that is I'm going to be using throughout the word abortion. But really, there are some people who have said, and there's some truth to this, that really words shape our perception and our reality. And abortion doesn't really sound like a word that conveys the enormity of what's being done. You'll notice that in the political divide in this country, the people will say fetus, and other people will say unborn child. What's going on? Because the people who don't want you to do an abortion, so they're going to say unborn child. The people who want to make a differentiation, they're going to say a fetus. The people who want abortions to be legal, they're going to call it an abortion, because abortion doesn't sound like a really terrible thing. After all, there was a project I was involved with earlier today, and then I had to abort it because it wasn't really working out so well, right? So abort. Whereas if you call it feticide or feticide, which is, that sounds like homicide, that all of a sudden sounds a lot more serious. And so that's a good taina, that really words do matter, and words do shape reality, and opinions that people have about things are shaped by the words that society uses. So this is true. That said, because it is so common to use that word, and in Halachah, in Jewish sources, the word is hapala, and already in Poskim they use that word, which is very similar to the word abortion, so therefore I'm going to continue using that word with the caveat mentioned. Okay, so what does it say in Parshas Mishpatim? It says as follows: V'chiyinatzu anoshim, when men are fighting, right? What else is new? V'nagfu isha hara, and they punch, attack, kick a woman who is pregnant. V'yatzu yiladeha, and her children emerge. It's interesting that it uses it in the plural. It doesn't say child, it says children. Obviously, this is a result of an attack, so it could have said one child. It's not entirely clear why the Torah uses the plural. Why does it use a case of multiple pregnancy? Okay, now the question is, what's v'yatzu yiladeha mean? They came out. What does it mean they came out? Did they come out alive and well and happy and all smiles for the pictures? And is that v'yatzu yiladeha? Or does v'yatzu yiladeha mean that the woman miscarried? Okay, we'll continue. V'la yia asay, and the children came out, and there is no tragedy. How are we supposed to understand? What does it mean there is no tragedy? One option is there is no tragedy because everyone's fine. The mother is fine, the children are fine, everyone's happy, everyone's all smiles. There is no tragedy. That's one option. The second option is there is a tragedy in that the v'yatzu yiladeha, the children came out dead. So why is there no tragedy? There's no tragedy to the woman. That's what we mean. There is no tragedy to the woman. So these are two options of understanding this pasuk. What is the din? Onesh onesh. The man shall surely be punished. When? How? Kashar yashis Allah bala isha. When the man makes a demand of, when the husband, the bala isha, makes a demand of the attacker, basically when he sues him, the nasan biflilim, and at that point, he will have to give what? Give money in front of judges. Flilim is judges. He has to give money in front of judges. He has to give money per the ruling of the judges. He continues the Torah and says, V'im asayniya, and if, however, there is a tragedy, then v'nasata nefesh, tachas nefesh, that we need to give a life for a life. So there are basically two different narratives that you could walk away from with by reading this pasuk. Option one, I'll give you one option for reading this pasuk, and we're going to call this option the fetus is a life option. This option says that the first pasuk is v'yashi yeladah, the children came out alive. V'lo ye'asein, there's no tragedy. Why? Because the children are alive. So then you need to demand money, because at the end of the day, the woman, she had a plan to have a child in a certain hospital, a certain date, at a certain time, certainly not in the middle of Kingston Avenue, and so therefore you have to give some money for that type of shame, and fine. But if there is a tragedy that the children, the fetuses were killed, then the person who did this is liable for the death penalty. That is one option for how to read these psukim. The other option, we'll call this option the option that says that a fetus is not a regular life, at the very least, fetus is the other option. You read it like this: V'yatzu yeladah, the kids come out dead. V'yatzu, it's a little bit of a funny, usually it's a funny term to use, but v'yatzu yeladah, the children come out dead. V'lo ye'asein, there is no tragedy. They came out dead, yeah, but I don't really consider that a tragedy. The mother dying is right. This isn't really a tragedy. V'lo ye'asein. Then, what is the penalty for killing a fetus? He pays money. Pays money for what? For her harming a fetus. And if there is a tragedy that the woman was killed, so the difference is huge between these two ways of reading it. One says if you kill a fetus, you're chayiv misa, and one says if you kill a fetus, you're befedish not chayiv misa. You understand the difference? So obvious the divergence between these two different ways of reading these psukim. And there have been people throughout history who read it the first way. I once read that the founder of Calvinism is within the Protestant Reformation. There is a different sects. So one of them is John Calvin, founded the Calvinists. It's a form of Protestant Christianity, and this is how he interprets these psukim. This is how you have to read it. Well, guess what? Chazal told us that the first way is not the right way. The one that says that a fetus is a life in the sense that there's a death penalty, this is incorrect. The reading is the second way. The v'yasu yeladah, the kids come out dead. The lo ye'asein, there's no tragedy. We don't call this a tragedy. And therefore, the payment is only financial. V'im asein, if the mother dies, this is the source of this is in the Mechilta that Reb Shimon bar Yochai, who makes this case very clearly. How does he derive it? Because there's another pasuk. We have another pasuk in Mishpatim that says, "Make ish v'meis meis yumas." So Chazal Darshan, what does it say? Make ish v'meis ish. What are we negating? It's not negating a female. So what is it negating? So it's negating an ish and not a uber. And therefore, when the pasuk says "Maka ish v'meis meis yumas," that there is death penalty for killing a human being, it does not apply to a human fetus. And so therefore, that's how we have to teach the psukim in Parach Chav Aleph, psukim Chav Beis and Chav Gimel, which is a little after Maka ish v'meis meis yumas. We have to interpret it in the way that we just said. And so, at the very least, we walk away from this teaching. And by the way, Rashi, Al-Asar, when you learn Chitas, he tells you this in 3 words. He tells you this is the right way to read it when we learn it in Rashi.
There's no differentiation between how viable the...
Right now, where we're holding right now, and there's no differentiation in pregnancy. It could be the first week of pregnancy, and it could be the last week of pregnancy. We have 2 approaches. One approach would say a fetus is your chayiv misa, just like when you kill a regular person. That's rejected by Chazal. Chazal tell us, no, that's not the right way to read it. And there is no argument in Chazal. All opinions agree. There is no dissent. All opinions agree there is no death penalty, and that this law would apply even on the day of birth. Before the child emerged, the same din would be that there is no death penalty. And so, at minimum, what we know is, all of a sudden, that a fetus is not the same as a regular living human being Because a regular living human being, we know the din is that there's at least a potential for a death penalty. Here, with a fetus, there is no potential for a death penalty. It's off limits. It's off limits.
Would there be a potential for a death penalty before the baby turns 30 days?
I didn't see anyone being mechalik. But remember, the halacha is that there is no death penalty at all during pregnancy. So it doesn't matter before 30 days or after days. There is no death penalty.
30 days after birth?
Oh, after birth. Oh, no. So there are sources that say it's already a ben yoimoy. There's already, once it emerges, there's already a din of a death penalty, but I don't remember, so I don't want to be quoted on Gedegnish. Okay.
Isn't there a puzzle that says that if you make a miscarriage, you have to pay just the value of like the...
That's exactly what we just read. That's
It doesn't say clearly.
It says anish anish. In Bechlal, whenever Torah uses the words anish anish, it usually means money. And then v'nasan b'flilim, giving. What's he giving? He's giving in front of judges. V'nasan always means a monetary payment. This is the makar. This is the source. Okay. Now, what's interesting here is that we're aware of the concept of the Septuagint. The Septuagint is the Greek translation of the Torah that was made during the time of Bayin Sheni. Chazal spoke about this, and Chazal were aware of the fact that there are differences in the Septuagint compared to the way we have in our Torah. And Chazal explained. Excuse me. Chazal explained that there was a reason for that. The reason for that was because the sages who interpreted the Torah made deliberate changes. And the Gemara Megillah, I believe, lists 10 changes that were deliberately made. Okay, the Septuagint, the way we have it today, has more than 10 changes. There are other changes as well. Okay, not entirely clear when and how they happened, but the bottom line is, in the Septuagint, on this pasuk, Vim Asain Yeh, this whole thing of a lo yeh asain, and if there is a asain, they interpret it in Greek words. They interpret it as, does the fetus have the figure of a human, or does the fetus not have a figure of the human? So in other words, the children, the fetuses emerge, but they don't have a human form, then it's only monetary payment. If the fetuses have a human form, then it's a life for a life. In other words, this is the beginning of a very long history of making a differentiation about the stages of pregnancy. That, it depends where. Earlier on in pregnancy, later on in pregnancy. And according to this reading, once a fetus has a form, and you can get into a discussion when that form is, how do you define what that is? It's not necessary for our purposes here. The people who made this translation, or the people who wrote this, what they wanted to say is that the Torah means tragedy, no tragedy. What does it mean? When is it tragic? When is it not tragic? When is it tragic? It's tragic when the fetus has a form. It's not, if the fetus doesn't have a human form, it isn't tragic anymore. Okay, that is against Chazal. Chazal did not accept that. Chazal said that throughout the entire duration of the pregnancy, the Karaim, the commentaries of the Karaim, the medieval Jews who rejected Chazal and said we're going our own way, some of their commentaries also adopted this approach. They wanted to say it this way. In other words, there was a certain discomfort with the idea to say that a fetus all the way through, even in the 9th month, there is no death penalty. They wanted to say that there should be a death penalty. They weren't so comfortable with this inyan of Chazal, and so therefore they found a way, it would seem, they found a way to interpret the psukim in a way where at least there is some stage of death penalty. But the bottom line is that this is not Chazal. There is no opinion in Chazal that accepts this. There is no death penalty for the murder, for the killing of a fetus, which then leads to the next question. So I told you before, the Torah says nothing about abortion. This is the only abortion, and it's not a voluntary one. So is there an Isser? Is there an Isser here? And if there is, where do we get it from? And that's the next part. Yeah?
Saying that today with being able to ultrasound the sonograms, you could say the tragedy is different than it was then.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, so let's. So where do we see that there is an Isser?
Words drawing the thought. You say killing a fetus, it's also
in terms of word, 100%. The words you use, whether you use killing, terminating, all these words are loaded, and there's no way to avoid taking a side in this whole discussion. Okay.
How did the Quran get us to mean baby form?
So. Two possibilities. One is that maybe somehow seeing in the word asain somehow being related to a Hebrew word that could be formed, and if that's the case, I don't know what it is. Another possibility is, no, it means tragedy, but how do you interpret that? A translation should be an interpretation, and so then that would be an easier way to understand this. Okay, and nonetheless, the reality is that an abortion is asur. A normal, regular case of an abortion is asur. Where do we see that? The simplest way of demonstrating that emerges from the Gemara in Sanhedrin. The Gemara in Sanhedrin, Daf Nun Zayin Amud Beis, says the following: Ben Noach ne'erag b'dayan echad uve'ed echad shaloi ba'asra. Although we sometimes talk about the equality before the law, the reality is that in a Talmudic law there isn't always equality before the law. Where do we see that? Because there's special dinim about how to do the death penalty for a yid. You need to have a court of 23 at a minimum to put someone to death. You need to have 2 witnesses. You need to have asra. For a ben noach, these limitations aren't there. A ben noach, it could be 1 judge. It could be 1 witness. They may not need hasra. It's a different standard. And in that daf, in that context, Rabbi Yishmael says, I'm going to give you another example where the law for a ben noach is different than a yid. What is it? Mishum Rabbi Yishmael amru, af alau barim. For killing, for terminating, whatever word you want to use, a pregnancy, there's a death penalty for a non-Jew. My time at Rabbi Yishmael, where did he get it from? Because when the Eibishter says in Parshas Noach, he says the pasuk, remember this is talking to Bnei Noach, it's not talking to Am Yisrael. It's talking to Bnei Noach. And what does it say? Sheifech dama adam, ba'adam dama yishafech. Okay, so if you have a pen, you take a pen, where do you put the comma? You put the comma after ha'adam. Sheifech dama adam, he who spills the blood of man, ba'adam dama yishafech. You see the poetic structure of this pasuk. How it begins with shayfech and ends with shayfech. This word and the second to last word is dam, and then the sandwich words in the middle are adam. Shayfech dam adam, but adam dam yishavech. He who spills the blood of man, by man, meaning a bezdin, should put him to death. Comes Rabbi Yishmael and says, we have the right to move over the comma. How do you move over the comma? Shayfech dam adam ba adam. He who spills the blood of a person who's within a person, dama yishafech, that person should be killed. And then he says, Ezeu adam shu ba'adam. When do you have a person inside a person? Havayomer ze uber shebemei imay. That is a fetus. This is the drasha of Rabbi Yishmael, in where he says that a ben noach is killed for killing a fetus. This only applies to ben noach. It can't apply to a yid because we already have the earlier text that I showed you. Make ish. And mish means not a fetus. And the v'chiyonatu anashim passage. And from all these, so we know it can't be referring to a yid. But we have this pasuk, so what do you say? This is a yid, this is a ben noach. And
is by accident? You say that the first pasuk is by accident?
The first pasuk is talking about an accident. They didn't want to hurt the woman. They wanted to hurt each other. They didn't want to hurt the woman.
It could be like, does anybody comment on that? That it could be one's by accident, one's intentional?
So when it says, when they kill the woman, so there is v'nasata nefesh tachas nefesh. There happens to, I didn't want to get into it. There is a machlokes if that's literal or not. But even if it's not literal, because it wasn't intentional, because the machlokes is, if Reuven tries killing Shimon and ends up killing a third person. So on the one hand, he wanted to do murder, and maybe there was hasra, and he had everything. But he ended up killing a different person. So what's the din? So here you see that it sounds like from the pasuk, that's exactly our case. And the din is, v'nasata nefesh tachas nefesh, that nonetheless there is the death penalty. Okay. But then one view says, no, if you're deserving the death penalty, we're not going to mamish do it. Okay, but either way, we don't apply either of those things to the fetus. So you see, the fetus is in a different ballpark. So we know that there is a isser. We see here that there is a isser. Now, so how do we know from here is a isser? It's only talking about goyim. Because there's a Gemara in Sanhedrin that says as follows. Leika midoyim dili Yisrael shari ulenachri aser. You know the word midi? The word midi is a shortened version of the word midaim, and that is something. Leika midaim, there is no something dili Yisrael shari that a Jew is allowed to do ulenachri aser. In other words, you can't say that a non-Jew can't do an abortion. V'haraya, they get executed for it, but a Jew is mutter. So Tosfos asks, but what do you mean? A Jew is exempt. So how does this fit with the rule that what's forbidden to the Gentile must be forbidden to the Jew? And for Tosfos, it's simple. A Jew is potter. There is no punishment in the sense of a death penalty, but it is not mutter. This is how we now have 2 truths, and these are not controversial. Truth number 1, there is no death penalty for a Jew to do an abortion. Number 2, there is isser for a Jew to do an abortion. But now we come to the big question. What is the nature of this isser? Because based on the nature of how you understand this isser, that's going to create a very different reality in terms of dealing with the questions. And for this, we turn to the famous Mishnah in Alois, where it's the only time the Mishnah discusses an abortion, is this one passage in Maseches Alois, where it gives the following famous case. We all know this din. None of you, we all heard this din before. But we need to now, what we're going to do is we're going to analyze this closely. And it goes as follows. Zok the Mishnah. Ha'isha she'imak shaleiled, a woman who's having difficulty in birth, machatchinas as havlad b'me'eh, so we cut the fetus, the vlad, the child, in her stomach, the me'eh, and we remove it limb by limb. He chooses here not to use the word abortion. He chooses to use gruesome details for whatever reason. Okay, so what's the din? She's having difficulty in birth. Today, Baruch Hashem, medicine were often able to solve these problems. It used to be that these were not solvable problems. So then what are you supposed to do in this case? It's him and her, and women are going for a number of days in labor, and the child, the fetus is not emerging. What are we going to happen? She's losing, it's a problem. What's the din? The din is that we abort the fetus in order to save the mother. What's the justification? Because her life, the mother's life, comes before the fetus's life. And so therefore, when here, I got to choose one, we choose the mother over the fetus. Yatsa rubai. However, if the majority of this fetus came out, and we'll see that some people had the girsa of roishai. You could see how that you can make a mistake between rubai and roishai. If the baby's head, and that's pretty much the halacha, the way Shulchan Aruch has it, so we're going to go with that. If the baby's head emerges, then we're not allowed to touch the fetus anymore. Why are we not allowed to touch the fetus anymore? You're not allowed to knock out one life for another life. The Gemara famously says that someone came to Rava and said, the governor said that I need to kill Yankel, if not, I'm going to die. So am I allowed to kill Yankel in order to save my life? After all, isn't saving life the most important thing in Judaism, so can I go kill Yankel? And what did Rava say? Rava said, who said your blood is redder than that person? In other words, that's the basic rule of you're not allowed to kill someone else to save yourself. So therefore, once the baby's head emerges, you're not allowed to say, I'm going to kill the baby to save the mother. You can't choose one life over the other life. So why don't I say the same rule during the pregnancy? What happened here? Why are we pushing off one life for another life? So Rashi understood this is an obvious question when we read the Mishnah. And so Rashi, Maseches Sanhedrin, explained, so long that it didn't come out into the world, lav nefeshu. It does not have the status of a nefesh. When the poskim use the word nefesh, what does it mean? It means the legal definition of human life. So long that it didn't come out, it's not a nefesh. Notice as well, the Mishnah, when it was speaking about the fetus in utero, did not call it a nefesh. It said it has chayim. It said chayeha koimen lechayav. So the idea, like biological life, yeah, obviously something biologically is alive here. But to give it nefeshhood, which is legal status as a human being, that it says no, lav nefeshu. Therefore, niten laharga lahatzazimah. Like, why not? You're allowed to kill it in order to save the mother. Yatsa roishe, once the head came out, ain't noigin by laharga, not allowed to touch him. Dahavale kiloid, because that's already like completely born. And here we have the rule of ein doichen nefesh bipnei nefesh.
Does the Mishnah learn this from the pasuk in Shmos?
No. It's not known. It's no. The Mishnah. I can't say no. The Mishnah never brings I shouldn't say never. Very rarely does it tell you where he's deriving the law from. That's more the job of the Gemara. There is no Chazal that tells us that this is derived from the Psukim. Though it's not a crazy thing.
Does the Gemara connect with that?
No, not in this way.
We know the pasuk in Shmos has no relevance to the action.
No, well, you could make a case. You could say the pasuk in Shmos said no death penalty. So if no death penalty, what does that mean? That it's not a nefesh. If it's not a nefesh, then this is the logical conclusion. You could say that. But hold on. We need to cover a little more ground.
Rashi says Rosh.
Yeah, Rashi has Rosh. Exactly. All the Rishonim, I'm pretty sure, have Rosh. Now, here's the deal. All of the Rishonim, the basic commentaries on the Gemara, all follow this approach. They use the words lav nefeshu to say a fetus, which to translate into the modern question, you say, is a fetus a life or not? Which means, is killing it murder or not? For all of them, they say a fetus is not alive. Fetus is not alive. Doesn't mean, again, it's not biologically alive. Of course, you can't deny that reality. But it doesn't have the din of a human life. The Ramban, he uses these words. The Rashba uses these words. The Ritva uses these words. The Yad Rameh uses all of those words. Sfard, Rashi is an Ashkenaz. Everyone says this. Everyone says this. However, the Rambam also writes a psak din about this Mishnah. And when we read this Rambam, you're going to pay attention closely, and you're going to realize that he's not saying the same thing that Rashi was saying. He's not saying. I'll tell you straight up. The words lav nefeshu, which is central to Rashi's understanding of the Mishnah and Olis, That's the whole Nekuda of Rashi revolves around those three words, that a fetus is not a nefesh. And therefore, it's ein doich nefesh v'nei nefesh. A fetus is not a nefesh, right? That's the central thesis of Rashi. Rambam doesn't have those words. They do not appear in the passage of Rambam when he's explaining this. And you'll notice that he gives a justification and he introduces a concept that Rashi didn't mention, that Ramban didn't mention, that Rashba didn't mention, none of them mention. A whole new concept. Let's read it. Sagt der Ramban hoch ist der Chushminas Nefesh, Hareis mitzvahs lois hasei shaloi lachos al nefesh haroidif. We have a mitzvahs lois hasei that we're not allowed to pity a roidif. What's the classic case of a roidif? A roidif is, imagine we look outside the window right now and we see that there's a yid, it doesn't matter who it is, Yankel is chasing someone else with a gun and he's saying, I'm going to kill you, I'm going to kill you, I'm going to kill you. We now, that Yankel chasing the other person with a gun is a din of a roidif. We have a chiyuv to save the victim of this chase. And if that means that the only way we could do it is by killing the roidif, then that's what we need to do. We need to kill the roidif. It's one of the few times when Halachah justifies killing. When does Halachah justify killing? There's judicial killing for a bezdin. Okay, that's a bezdin. There's killing in war. Okay, that's a war. When does Halachah justify killing in a day-to-day environment? Very rarely. This is one of the cases where Torah says the din of a roidif. So now a person saying, what do you mean? Yankel's such a nice guy. In fact, Yankel is 16, and the person he's chasing is 85. So, the math doesn't work. Let's let it. No, we don't do that. It's a mitzvah loisa say you're not allowed to take pity on the roidif. Lefichach, what's the result of this din? Hoiru chachamim, the chachamim taught us, showabara, a pregnant woman who's having difficulty in birth, mutter is permitted to cut the fetus in her womb, bein besam, bein beyad, and we could use a potion, some sort of poison. We could do it manually, and the reason this is allowed because this fetus is is deemed as though he is pursuing her to kill her. And just like we're going to kill Yankel on the street for chasing that other person, so too we're going to be killing the fetus in order to save the mother. So notice what happened here. Lav nefeshu, the words that the fetus in utero is not nefesh, those words did not appear here. That can't be an accident. And in fact, the Rambam here introduced a different logic, a different explanation, a different rationale of roidif that none of the other Rishonim spoke about. So what's happening here? So very early on, a long time ago, it was already noticed that Rambam has a problem. He can't say lav nefeshu. Why? Because the Rambam believes, and we'll maybe return to this later, why he believes this way. The Rambam believes a fetus is a nefesh. And if you believe that a fetus is a nefesh, then what happens? Ein doich nefesh v'nei nefesh. You can't knock off one for another, just like, right? You can't do it. So there's a problem. But the Mishnah says befedish, and no one disagrees that you're allowed to kill a fetus to save a mother. So he has to come up with a different rationale. So what's his other rationale? A roidif. A roidif is one of the only cases where you're allowed to kill one life for another life. A roidif is a regular life. It's a nefesh. And Alpha became the din is, this is an instance where you're allowed to kill a nefesh to save another nefesh. Oh, so the Rambam says, let's just say that the fetus is a roidif. And if you say the fetus is a roidif, then even though it's a nefesh, we could kill it. What is it? Where does that leave us? Oh my God, all of a sudden, we have a machlokes in the Rishonim, whether a fetus is a nefesh or not. And why does that matter? Because whether a nefesh or not means murder or not, as we're gonna see. So this is a major difference. One second. Hold on a second. Mela, according to Rashi, I understand the difference before, after. It's very easy. Before it's mutter because it's not a nefesh. After it's asur because it is a nefesh. Okay, Rambam. Before it's asur before it's mutter because the fetus is a roidif, and after the head emerges, weiter roidif. Oh my God, this question has kept people up hundreds of hours collectively. I saw once in a sefer someone collected from the generation from Achronim, the last 500 years. I think I saw 18 different answers to this question. Everyone is struggling. What's going? Roidif before, roidif after. What is the difference? It is a very shver Rambam. Okay, because the Rambam's introducing a new concept over here, and it's hard. What does he mean? The explanation that matters most is Rav Moshe Feinstein's explanation. Why does this explanation matter most? The reason is because it has the most influence on Psak Halacha today, and so therefore his explanation is the way to go. What does he explain? He explains as follows. Well, I'm going to summarize for you text 10. He basically says like this. Really, there's another problem here. You're saying the fetus is a roidif. You have a problem here. What's the problem? Why are you saying the fetus is being roidif the mother? You could say that the mother is being roidif the fetus. In what way is the mother being roidif the fetus? Imagine someone's trying to get ear to come out and you're holding them down. So you're a roidif. Why is that not a roidif? If I go and hold you down and don't let you breathe and don't let you have the things that you need in order to survive, so I should be called a roidif. So the mother is that. Now, of course, the mother is not doing it willingly. But guess what? The fetus is also not doing anything willingly over here. So why is the mother not a roidif? Elamai, they're taka both roidfim. They're taka both roidfim. However, and here we need to fine tune. Although the Rambam says that believes that the fetus is a nefesh, it's a nefesh. It's not a nefesh gomer. It's not a nefesh gomer. So it's not a full life. It's life. It has the din of human life, but it's not full human life. Why? Because at the end of the day, it's not breathing on its own. Whatever you want to say, it's not full human life. It's not full human life. As a result, what happens here? Who is the more wicked? I know it's funny to use this term, but in order to understand it, we're going to have to use these inappropriate terms. Who's the more wicked one over here? Is the fetus more wicked or is the mother more wicked? The fetus is more wicked. Well, why? Because the fetus, the mother is being roidif a partial life, not a full life. Okay, so if you want to give it numbers, between 1 to 10, that crime is only a 5. If you're killing a partial life. It's ritzicha, but it's only a number 5 ritzicha. But the other way around, what is the fetus doing? It's being roidif a complete, full, regular human life. That on a crime level, that's 10. Because of that difference, therefore we say, you're worse of a roidif, so we're going to knock you out, the fetus. Once the head emerges, so now they're both equal. They're both nefesh gomer. They're equal roidfim of each other. What happens if you look out the window, you see Yankel chasing Shmuli, and they're both facing guns with each other, they're both saying they're both going to kill each other? No. So what do? You knock out one? You can't knock out one. Why? They're both right of each other. It's hands off. Obviously, if you can save them, you save them. But you have no right to knock off one. When two people are right of each other, it's hands off. So this is what's happening. This is the way the Moshe explains the Rambam. What he says is that once the head emerges, it's a nefesh gomer versus nefesh gomer. They're both being right of each other, hands off. When it's in utero, so the fetus is more of a roidif than the mother is a roidif, and so therefore we knock out the fetus in order to save the mother, not the other way around. This is how he explains it. And he's medayik. If you look at 9, the Moshe is medayik in this Rambam, as others before him have as well. Hare desoiver, what do we see? The bottom line of this Rambam, ta'afsha pataru, although there is no death penalty for an abortion, al kopanin le'inyan iser, if you want to know, we know it's aser, but if you want to know the nature of this iser, guess what? It's ritzicha mamish. It's murder. And why is it murder? Because we define a fetus as a life. And once you define it as a life, even lav nefesh gomor, it's not a nefesh gomor, but it doesn't matter. Once it has nefesh hood, even a small percent of legal nefesh hood, then it is considered ritzicha. Which is why, really, you wouldn't be allowed to kill a fetus. And the only reason why you're allowed to kill it, because it's only because we have the right to save a victim af benefesh roidif by killing the roidif. In other words, what I need you to recognize and understand over here is, if you say a fetus is a life, then the heter about killing to save the mother, it's not on such strong footing. I mean, it's strong footing because it's the roidif, but to us it's like, yeah, obvious, save the mother. It's not so obvious. The rule is ein doiche nefesh mipnei nefesh. So once you want to say that a fetus has the status of a nefesh, it's like a chiddush gadol that we're allowed to do an abortion to save the mother. In fact, there are other religions who take a different view on this matter. Okay, so I'm not an expert in Catholic doctrine, but my understanding is, and I did see this quoted in some books on Jewish medical ethics, that there have been popes who said that it's not permitted to do it even to save the life of the mother. Why? Because they take the rule. Ein doiche nefesh b'nei nefesh. They have that rule. Okay, we have that rule too. We don't have that rule when it comes to a fetus. Why? Because we say the fetus has a din of a roidif, and with the qualification and explanation that Moshe gave us, which allows us to understand what's happening over here.
So what about halacha for daim themselves?
One second. Let's hold the questions because there's a lot to cover. Let's hold the questions today, and if that's okay with you, if it's okay, hold the questions today. Okay. Now, can we bring a raya to the Rambam Shitta? Like, where did Rambam come from? What Chazal forced him to say that a fetus is a nefesh? So maybe it's a Gemara like this. Amar Rav Nachman Amar Shmuel, Ha'isha sheyashva ala mashber, a woman who is on the birthing stool, umeisa b'Shabbos, and the woman died. What's the halacha? Mavi'in sakin. We bring a knife from a karanis kreson. We perform a surgery. You might see in a savlad. We take out the fetus. Frekta gemara pshita my ovid. Obviously, what's the big deal? Mechatech bebasaru. You're just cutting into the woman's flesh. That's not one of the lamites malachis. So why would we think there's anything wrong? Amar Rabba explained. The reason we need this teaching is lahavi sakin derech rishus harabin, because you don't have the surgical knife, and you need to bring it through the rishus harabin. That's is a deraisa. So you would think that maybe you're not allowed to do it. Kamash and you do it. Why? To save the life of the fetus. Okay, well, listen to that. You're being Mechalal Shabbos for it. If it's not a life, what gives you a right to be Mechalal Shabbos? We know that Chilul Shabbos is a very serious thing. What is a justification to override Shemitah Shabbos? Life. A life. We say, oh, it's a Yiddish, a life, we're going to push off Shabbos. But if you're telling me, Lav Nefeshu, why are we being Mechalal Shabbos for a fetus? So maybe the Rambam sees this. Maybe the Rambam says it's a raya that it is a nefesh, and maybe that started the whole process in motion. It could be. The Ramban holds that it's not a nefesh. So how does the Ramban deal with this? The Ramban says very simple. He says, don't get carried away. It's not a strong question at all. Why? There are two different justifications for why we're Mechalal Shabbos. There are two different. One is v'chai b'hem. What does v'chai b'hem mean? That a mitzvah shouldn't get in the way of life. Okay, that only applies to a legal life. If you're a legal life, we say a mitzvah shouldn't get in the way of life. So v'chai b'hem taka can't apply to a fetus, he says, because it's not a nefesh. However, there's another reason we're Mechalal Shabbos. It's a whole different pasuk. The pasuk says, "V'shamu b'nei Yisrael as Shabbos, last as a Shabbos." Jews should keep the drash of Chazal is Jews should keep Shabbos in a way that ensures future Shabbos observance. V'shamu b'nei Yisrael as a Shabbos in such a way, last as a Shabbos l'dorosim. So if you're a Mechalal Shabbos one time and someone stays alive, you know how many Shabbos he gets? It's a good business deal. You're Mechalal Shabbos once, then he has thousands of Shemitah Shabbos in his life and his children, his Einach. So Chalal Shabbos achas kedush mer Shabbos is harbe. If you go with that logic, you don't need to be dealing with a life. If you go with that logic, it could be a non-life. And in fact, this is useful and important in Halachah, because what happens, the Alter Rebbe deals with in Shulchan Aruch, what happens if they came and they kidnap a Jew, Chas v'shalom, on Shabbos. And now they're taking her to the monastery, she's going to grow up there. Okay, she's healthy, she's fine. She may have actually more arichas yamim there than she's going to have in the Jewish community. So what justifies, are you allowed to get onto your horse and be Mechalal Shabbos to get the girl back on Shabbos? Don't bring me v'chai b'hem, her life's not in danger. So why is it mutter? Called Chalal Shabbos achas kedusha Shabbos harbe. So in other words, it's important to have both. Of these justifications. Zok the Ramban, that's what's happening here. Yeah, I know the fetus is in the utero, and I know it's not alive, and yeah, you're right, v'chai b'hem doesn't work here, because lav nefeshu. Elamai, Chalal Shabbos achas. I'm being Mechalal one Shabbos, Kadesh Shabbos is harbe. That's how the Ramban gets out of it. So you see, and this is really, you could go on and on. There are 6 or 7 different passages in Chazal, and you could say, it sounds a little more like Rashi, lav nefeshu. Then you realize, Rambam could interpret it. You could do the other way around. Just find some passages and say, it sounds a little more like Rambam. It sounds like a fetus is mamash alive. And you'll see, just like here, that not just like here, this sounded like Rambam, and Ramban was able to defend it, and you have the other way around as well. There is no definitive chazal on this question. If a fetus is nefesh or not, you're not going to find anything definitive, which is precisely why we have a machlekes rishonim. You wouldn't have a machlekes rishonim if there was a definitive statement in chazal about that. So now, what do we have now? Rambam, it's easy, it's very, very simple. We know what an abortion is, we know it's murder, and we know the only case pretty much that it's going to be mutter to allow an abortion. And the only time it's going to be mutter to allow an abortion is if we could label the fetus as a roidev. That's it. That is going to be the only case. And if any of the shilas that come up, what about this case, this case, this case? You always come back to one question. The question is, can we label the fetus as a roidev? If the answer is no, forget it, sorry, so there's nothing you can do about it. If the answer is yes, then we do the abortion. So it's like pretty clear, it's pretty straightforward when you follow Rambam. Okay, what about if you follow the other Rishonim? So you know that there's no death penalty, you know that it's usher, you know that it's not a life. So it can't be usher under lo yisirtzach. So it's usher under what? Which of the 365 negative commandments is this prohibited under? It's not lo yisirtzach. Lo yisirtzach only applies to a life. Here we move into the next zone of non-clarity. Within the shit of Rishonim, they say, Lav Nefeshu, what is the nature of this Isser? We're going to explore today 3 different shittas on how to understand Rashi and his Lav Nefeshu shitta. So the first explanation is from Rabbi Yechiel Yaakov Weinberg. Rabbi Yechiel Yaakov Weinberg, he passed away in the 1960s, early 1960s. He was in the Warsaw Ghetto. He was a Rav in Germany before the war and after the war in Switzerland. And he has Shalos Teshuvos called Sri Deyesh. And look what he says. He says like this. First of all, we should know that the Isser here is Minat Torah. We're talking about a biblical Isser. Shim Loi Kain, what's his evidence? How could you say that the Torah says that you could violate Shabbos to save this, but you could also kill it? That makes no sense. So it must mean, if the Torah is telling us that you could violate Shabbos, whatever the reason is, I don't care, Chalal Shabbos Achas, if Torah is saying Chalal Shabbos Achas, that you're allowed to violate Shabbos for this entity, it must be that Torah gives protection to this entity, and it must mean that we're not allowed to. Ella, next paragraph. The Toisus, remember we saw Toisus earlier that said it's usher for a Yid. He didn't tell us what is the Isser, what is the nature of the Isser. Remember, he's talking in the Shitta of Rashi. So, Lav Nefeshu. If Lav Nefeshu, it's definitely not Loi Sirtzach. And he says, because if there was Loi Sirtzach, there would be no justification to kill the fetus in utero, because if it's a Nefesh, and therefore Loi Sirtzach would apply to it, so then there would be no heter to ever terminate. Next paragraph. It must be that Chazal knew this is not murder. We don't know what the Isser is. This happens sometimes. We say, we know it's Da'iraisa, we can prove it's Da'iraisa. This happens in Gemara. What Da'iraisa, which pasuk? We don't have that information. We do not have that information. We can't tie it to any one specific. There are different options. If Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, who followed the Shitta, who said, it's also min ha-Torah, but not Etzicha. But it's also min ha-Torah. That's a serious thing, but not Etzicha. So he said, maybe you connect it to Gzela. You're not allowed to steal. So when you're terminating the fetus's life, you're stealing. Okay, so this is what he explored. Other people explore other things. You could go on forever. But this is one Shitta. A Shitta is that it's Ism min ha-Torah. If it's Ism min ha-Torah, how do you analyze it? You analyze it, when do we violate Ism min ha-Torah? We violate Ism min ha-Torah to save a life. To save a life. So now you may be thinking, so it's the same thing. For the Rambam, it's to save a life. And in this model, in Rashi, according to Rabbi Yechiel Yaakov Weinberg, it's to save a life. No, don't say that. For Rambam, it's the fetus has to be a roidif, and for Rashi, it only has to be, and for Rabbi Yechiel Yaakov Weinberg's interpretation of Rashi, it only has to be bikuach nefesh. There are differences between them, and we'll talk about it soon. Okay? There are differences between them. That's option one. Option number two is the Maharit. The Maharit lived in the 1600s. His name was Rabbi Yosef Mitrani. His father is known as the Mabit. He was born in Sfas. The Maharit was later he moved to the Ottoman Empire, meaning he was in the Ottoman Empire, but he moved to actual Turkey. And he writes as follows. He is two tshuvas on abortion. We're just going to quote a few words where he defines the Isser. He writes, the Asur Midin Chavalahu. The Isser here is Chavala. So he points to an Isser in the Torah. There is an Isser in the Torah about self-wounding. The Gemara darshans and shows us how this is Isser in the Torah. We don't have to get into the drasha now. And so there's an Isser of self-wounding, self-harm. So he says that an abortion is under the category of self-harm. What's the difference? What's the difference between this and if you just say Asr min ha-Torah the way Rabbi Yaakov Weinberg did? Is a chavala, if you're allowed to say this, is a very weak Isser. What I mean is a very weak Isser. Chavala, there's built into the chavala is a chavala that's being done for the purpose of alleviating pain is mutter. It's not even controversial. A chavala that's being done. If a person self-wounds, the classic case is if a person goes to the doctor. If a person self-wounds in order to relieve themselves of pain, it's mutter. And so if that's going to be the yisoid of the Isser, so on the one hand it is an Isser min ha-Torah, but at the same time it's not going to be a very strong Isser. So that's the second option. Third option,
The mother or the baby?
Chavala the mother. Chavala the mother.
Supports the pro-abortion.
Hold on. We'll do that at the end. Then you have the Toiras Chesed. The Toiras Chesed, you can bring this from multiple sources. I'm bringing it from the Toiras Chesed. His name was Shneir Zalman Fradkin. He lived in the 1800s, and he was a chassid of the Tzemach Tzedek and a chassid of the Maharash. Later he moved to Eretz Yisrael, but he was a Rav in Lublin, a big goyin. And he has a tshuva on abortion, and he writes, Das HaToises also min HaTorah. It's also min HaTorah. Cheinir, das HaRambam is also min HaTorah. Aval das HaToises in Nidan, das HaRan, and we're not going to get into these sources, is that it's actually mutter min HaTorah, but there's an Isser D'Rabbanan. There's an Isser D'Rabbanan. What's the Isser? The Ein la'abed ubar sha'asid li yisnefesh mi'Yisrael. One, the Rabbanan came along and said, do not destroy potential life. And so here we have it. Really, there are four things. Let's start again from the Rambam. The Rambam tells us an abortion is a ritzicha. It's a ritzicha. Why? Because the fetus is alive. And so therefore abortion is a ritzicha. Number one. That's in our first bucket. Now let's go to our second bucket. Our second bucket is, there's no ritzicha. It's not alive. Okay, so what's the problem? So in this bucket, we divide it into three. The first compartment says, it's asur min HaTorah, treated the same like Shabbos and Chazer, basically. Treated the same like Shabbos and Chazer. Okay, that's one. The second one says it's chavala. Oh, if it's chavala, then any time it's being done to relieve pain, it's going to be mutter. And the third one say it's a din darabanan. If it's a din darabanan, it's basically going to be the same as you say for chavala, because generally speaking, the poskim assume that the rabbanan they made gzeiros, but in extraordinary cases they didn't apply their gzeiros to extraordinary cases. But makam sar loy gazru. This is a very common thing. So really, there's not going to be so much of a practical difference if you say it's chavala midairaisa, or if you say that it's iser darabanan. It's going to pretty much end up being the same thing. So what is going to be the bottom line? So first, we're going to do this together with showing you how poskim, pashut rule, kipshutai, how they make their rulings. Rav Moshe Feinstein follows the Rambam. He says the Rambam all the way. Which means a fetus is alive, making an abortion is ritzicha. The only exception is roidiv. Okay, let's read his text inside. Ledina, number 16. Ika isur ritzicha maloi sirtzach gam aluber. The 10 Commandments, loi sirtzach, applies to a fetus. The only thing is, shapatar hargem emisa, there is no death penalty. Fine. But the fact that there is no death penalty doesn't detract from the fact that this is murder. Listen to this line. V'asur lahargai af lipikuach nefesh dechol inchi. You're not allowed to kill a fetus even for pikuach nefesh of other people. What's the case he's talking about? Let's say there's a woman who is pregnant. And there's another person, this is the case, I don't know if this is practical today, but I'm giving you a theoretical case. There's another person who needs a bone marrow transplant. And the only donor is the mother who's pregnant. And the doctors say, but if you're going to do the bone marrow transplant, you are going to kill the fetus. So, are you allowed to do it or not? So now think the difference. Is this fetus a roidif? What's this fetus a roidif? He's not a roidif anyone. He's not a roidif anyone. Everything's fine. Is it a case of pikuach nefesh? Yes, it is a case of pikuach nefesh. You see the difference? It's not the same thing. Roidif is very different. So that's what Rav Moshe is saying. Only for the birth, the saving the mother, that the mother shouldn't die in the process of birth. There's even more over here going on. This, I don't want to say this definitely, but during the Holocaust, Germans would say, a woman is pregnant, this happened, we're going to kill you. This was a common thing. Is that fetus a roidif? Is it pikuach nefesh? Absolutely, to do an abortion. And by the way, most of the rabbanim that I saw, they passed me that it was mutter to do. But is that fetus a roidif? No. And that's what I think what Moshe is saying over here. You're only allowed to do it that during the birthing process, then you can say, oh, this fetus is being a roidif because of its movement. And not for any other need, meaning not any other health need. What if they say a woman, she continues the pregnancy, she's going to go blind. She's going to continue the pregnancy, she's going to be sick. There's no heter. That's not called a roidif. Okay, so I gave you three points that Rav Moshe is telling us. I don't care about blindness. I don't care what the Nazi said. I don't care about the fact that there's another woman who needs to be saved. It's going to be usher. And therefore he said, I ruled, even if the physicians say, oh, the woman's in danger. So when it comes to Shabbos, we'd say, oh, the doctor said it's a danger. Go in the car and go to the hospital right now. We don't even ask any questions, right? And he says that's right for Shabbos. Why? Because Shabbos, pikuach nefesh, there's a 2% chance you break Shabbos. 1% chance you break Shabbos. However, Mekomaka, and jump a few lines, Ladek es a ubar yia asur, to kill a ubar, because this is not just pikuach nefesh, it's asur, ad shetia laharoifin gedoyla, karev levadai shatamus ha'eim. This almost never happens. Most cases this is a dangerous situation. 20% of the cases, it's life-threatening. 30% of the cases, it's life. How many times does it happen where they say, it's almost certain that you're going to die if you carry this pregnancy? Very, very rare. Well, guess what? Imagine you look out of the window and you see Yankel, he's with a gun. You're like, maybe he's a roidif, maybe he's not a roidif. 50% chance he is, 50% maybe he's just playing, maybe it's real. Are we allowed to knock him out? Of course not. You don't kill a Suffolk roidif. So if you don't kill a Suffolk roidif, so you can't say, they say a 20% chance it's going to be dangerous. Sorry. He uses the test, Korav Levadai. Okay? I need you to realize how strict the view is. If you say a fetus is a nefesh, if you say that it's a life, and we say that we're saying lo yisirtzach, you need to realize what that implication is, that the fetus has to be labeled a roidif. A roidif means that its movement is going to threaten the mother, karev levadai, and that's the only reason and way that it's going to be mutter, and not all the other cases that came up along the way that we were reading this. And then in the next paragraph he says, obviously, a fetus that is detected to have abnormalities, and the case that he used here was Tay-Sachs, which was a big problem before genetic testing. He says, and a couple finds out that they're going to have a baby with this abnormality, and the tsar to the parent is unbelievable, and the baby's never able to leave the hospital, and before 3 years old the kid passes away, and it's hell for everyone. Can you say that baby is a roidif? You can't say the baby is a roidif. So end the story. There's no discussion even. Kemuvin is aser, he writes. Okay, that's what Moshe finds. Next Rav is Rabbi Vosner. He just passed away, right? During COVID, I think he passed away. He was in Bnei Brak. Rabbi Vosner takes the approach to say, hold on, not Ritzicha, not Nefesh, let's work within Rashi. But it's Isam in HaTorah. So here says, look at the Gamla Sevin Sheish Yisr Torah, even if we hold that it's Yisr Torah, Annam Eina Begeder Nefesh Mi Yisrael, this does not count as a life, Neged Ibud Nefesh Ha'im, as compared to the mother. And therefore, Bezehi Kila Torah is Meikol Afilu B'Safik, V'Afilu B'Svek Sveika, U'V'Safik Harachik. So what's he saying? He's saying, if a woman presents herself to a doctor, and they say, there's a chance, a small chance. Okay, Min HaTorah already you're dealing with Pikuach Nefesh. Once it's chazer, once we're comparing, abortion is chazer in his mind. That's what it is, it's chazer. Okay, so if the doctor said, there's a small chance you need to eat the chazer, you're going to eat the chazer, so then you do the abortion. That's the test that he makes. And all of a sudden, all those other, the Nazis, for sure you do the abortion. To save someone else's life through a transplant, for sure you do, all those cases would be open for him. He then goes on to say that the Chazon Ish agreed with him on this. This was the Chazon Ish's perspective. And he just said, however, that you need all the doctors to agree that there's a danger here. If there's one doctor even that says that, no, that I don't really think there's a danger, then we need to take that seriously. He then concludes that tshuva by saying that you should have to be careful, however. Why? He says, because doctors very often, whether it's to protect themselves or others, they often, he writes, in his experience, they're upping the risk. And so therefore, you need to be really careful to make sure that it's taka, a case of pikuach nefesh. Once you establish it's a case of pikuach nefesh, then it's going to be mutter. So that follows directly from the view that says, Lav nefeshu, but this is Isam in HaTorah, and it's a serious Isam in HaTorah. Then we come to the last category. The last category says that it's Chavala. That's Chavala. Or that it's D'Rabbanan. And here, as I said before, if it's only Chavala, so then b'makom sar, it's going to be mutter. All of a sudden that changes. Now it doesn't need to be life-threatening anymore. Now, I gave you a case before. A woman's going to be blind. Or a woman's going to have severe anguish, a depression, or this, without going to suicide or anything like that. So all of a sudden we say, b'makom sar. A person's allowed to cut off a finger, b'makom sar. Right? So a person is going to be allowed to do this, b'makom sar. Likewise, if it's Issa D'Rabbanan, it'll be the same thing. Issa D'Rabbanan is very, very serious. Very serious. We don't sneeze at Issa D'Rabbanan. Right? One of the rabbis said, D'Rabbanan vagert nicht. We're very careful about D'Rabbanan. But we have an assumption that b'makom tsar, they didn't make the gzeira. So if you establish that we're dealing with a serious tsar, not a joke tsar, an emes tsar, so then we'll be open to making this abortion. And Tzitz Eliezer, Rabbi Eliezer Waldenberg, he brings all these different shittas. And he sums it up. But if you look at number test. Let's look at test. See, right. Then it's easy heter. In other words, if there's danger to the woman, without having to establish that the fetus is a roidif and is karalafad, anything. If there's a sakana, then it's easy. There's a broad basis of consensus that we could be matter the abortion. Then he goes to, but what about relying on the Kabbalah position, or what about relying on the Rabbanan position? So this is where he moves into Yud and the next piece. He says, if the woman is unstable, for her to become stable, or to get rid of pain, big pain, we need to do an abortion. There's no danger. There is room to be matir. Why is there room to be matir? Again, if it's a mamish ism and atar like chazer, we don't say, oh well, if someone's having pain, they ki chazer. We don't say that. The reason he's saying that is if you follow the view of chavala, then we do say that. If you follow the view of Darabana, then this makes sense. Then in Yud Beis he gives another case. Eishes ishazansa say, a married woman was unfaithful and committed adultery. Oinensa, she was raped. Vinis Abra, and she became pregnant. So if it's a Yid, kid's a mamzer. Vafil me'akum, if it's from a non-Jew, she'ein avad mamzer, v'chazer b'tshuva, if it's adultery. Obviously, you don't need tshuva for rape. But if it was a case of adultery and she did tshuva, so then, and she doesn't want this fetus. She doesn't want this fetus. So then, Metzadedim Kama Migdolei Poiskim, he brings earlier Poiskim, that again, follow the Chavala or the Derabanan model, lahater. Why? Because of her bizayon, because of the Chilul Hashem, because of Gam Mishpacha. Now again, in the Tzicha, you're crazy? There's no way you can have this conversation even. In the Rambam's model, what we're having a conversation about this, no, you can't have that conversation. Even if you take the view that it's like Chazer, you can't have this conversation. Bizayon Mishpacha? To eat Chazer? No one eats Chazer for Bizayon Mishpacha. Oh, but if it's Chavala, and Chavala is Mukim Makdim Sar, and if it's the Rabbanan, and we say that the Rabbanan Loi Gazru, but Makdim Sar Loi Gazru, then you can have this conversation. And then he finishes off his tshuva, knowing how a little afraid that this is a slippery slope, saying that we need to be really, really careful about this. You can't have Kalos Rosh and Rabbanim have this serious achrayis to handle this seriously. He basically, to put it in simple terms, Reb Moshe follows the Rambam Ritzicha. Tzitz Eliezer follows the Rabbanon, Lav Nefeshu, and the Isser is only the Rabbanon. That's pretty much how he's willing to go. And the Shevet HaLevi is in the middle, and the other person as well. Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach is in this category. Isser min HaTorah, it's like Chazer. So we don't have to up the ante and say it has to be Karel Levadai. Any case of B'Koach Nefesh is going to be okay, but it has to be B'Koach Nefesh. And that's pretty, you see how this translated, how you start out with a din in the Torah. And the din in the Torah didn't give us much information. All it told us is there is no death penalty. So then we moved to a Mishnah. And we saw in the Mishnah what? There's two ways of interpreting what's going on in the Mishnah. That gave us our initial two buckets of Rambam versus all the other Rishonim. Within all the other Rishonim, we gave you three different views. And now you see how it comes down today, that within the frum world, you have different ways of paskening when it comes to this issue. What did the Rebbe say? What did the Rebbe say? Yeah, we'll get there. What did the Rebbe say? So the Rebbe says there's a few minus. I saw 4 different minus from the Rebbe. And in all 4 minus of the Rebbe refers to abortion as Ritzicha. In other words, the Rebbe seems to be going in the shita of the way that Moshe understands the Rambam. I have a small caveat to that, which I'll say, but first let's read the first. We'll just do one. Let's read both of these. Zok the Rebbe. This is a minor from Dalit or Tavshem Mem Dalit. Ledaber al libam ha'emes. You, the person, should speak the truth. Is it today? Is today Tasir? Okay. Ledaber al libam ha'emes. Kemoy shehi. The truth. Shedrishas hoireah laseis hapala. That the parents demand that the daughter do an abortion. He kepshuta. This is literally Shabbas tichya tahareg rachmana lasanas yalda is going to kill her child. Veheim, and the parents who are pressuring the daughter, Yargu es hanechat shalem rachmana lasan, are killing their grandchild. V'adsoif yimei chayem, until the end of their days. Yuchak benishmas kol echad mehem she'asuzeh. It's always going to be there. This gets into a whole other thing which we're not going to spend time. It's definitely something that I assume has been studied and maybe needs to be studied more. When a person does an abortion, they're often solving a problem, but are they causing? What are they going to be thinking about? How are they going to feel about that years later? So the Rebbe is mentioning that over here. But what's the case? What's the case? We're able to understand what the case was over here. But pashtus, when do parents pressure a child to have an abortion?
Out of wedlock. When
she's out of wedlock. You have to say that here is a case of a girl who wasn't married and she became pregnant. So in other words, it's like one of the cases. Well, Tzitz Eliezer didn't talk about a pnuya actually. Tzitzel doesn't talk about that case. But it's a woman and a person can make a cheshbon that's going to shot the shidduch and it's not good for this and she's young and all the things. The Rebbe says that the parents demanding that she do this is murder. The next one, the Rebbe comes back to the idea, where we spoke about earlier, of Tafshan and Aleph. Ein za hapala. Don't call it an abortion. Because hapala doesn't sound ominous. Kim rachmana litzlan harikas uber. It's murder. Not even to think about it. Okay. And you see in the next line, the Rebbe says, even if you say you're chiloni, uses the word ritzicha. I saw another 2 minors that are mamish on the same kat. Now, the only thing we need to be careful about is to comment, and I'm not a Rav and I'm not a Poisik, but the comment to say that therefore the Rebbe logically fits into every way like Reb Moshe. So now you're saying, okay, so is the Rebbe paskening that if it's only a 50% risk that it's not, then they can't terminate the pregnancy? The Labav Sharabanim don't pasken that way.
The last line, Rebbe
They
says
don't.
it's even worse than that.
Yes. Why? So what's happening here? This is the way I think you're supposed to understand this. When an abortion, normally you say a Rav has a right to think this way. Normally, an abortion is ritzicha. At least we have to be choshesh that way. Even if it's a suffix, the default is it's ritzicha. Then comes happen where there's a extenuating circumstance, there's a significant need, and here we look, and even with our Torah Igen, say there's a tzorich for an abortion. So here, the same person who told the other person it's ritzicha has a right to say, we're going to today rely on the shitta because it's shasat chak, that it's not ritzicha. Okay, so it's not a stira. I could tell someone yesterday, by the way, you can't do the abortion if you do it tzitzicha. And even though, what if I follow that theory all the way to its logical end, that means I need... No. The next day, there's a case that came up, and it's extenuating circumstances. So today, I'm going to say, there's enough poskim that say it's not a tzitzicha. It's only also min HaTorah there. And you know what? Because of shasat chak, I'm going to rely on that. So that's why we need to be very, very careful before we run and jump and say that based on this, the Rebbe is going to the Moshe all the way. And as far as I know, I do not believe that Lubavitch Rabbanim that get shilas about this. I do not. They generally follow seems a shitta. They don't wait till it mamish is a cut of levadai type of a sakana. At least some of the cases that I'm aware of. And so that's an important thing to consider. All of this presented the pregnancy as one long duration. We weren't machalik. Now this is going to take 5 more minutes, and with this we're gonna conclude. This week's parsha is Parshas Hemer. In Parshas Emor, we say as follows: Uvas Kohen, 21. Kisiya Amano Grusha, a daughter of a Kohen who married a Yisrael, but then her husband died, either died or divorced her. Vizera Eila, she doesn't have any children. Vishava al Beis Avia Kinurea, she's allowed to go back to her father's house, who's a Kohen. Milechem Avia Toichel, she's allowed to eat truma. If she marries a Yisrael, she's a Yisrael now, she can't eat truma. He dies, she has children. She's weiter a Yisrael, solidified by the fact she has a child from a Yisrael. She's a Yisrael, she can't eat truma. No children, she goes back to her father's house. She could eat truma. What if she's pregnant? So if the 6th month of pregnancy, she's not allowed to eat truma. Why? Because the presence of the ubar means that she's already outside of the shevet. She can't have. Nonetheless, says the Gemara in Yevamos, Bas Kohen she'nisas Yisrael, a Bas Kohen who married Yisrael, umeis, and let's say he died the night of the wedding, or 2 days after the wedding, so maybe she's pregnant, maybe she's not, no one knows. So she went back home now, is she allowed to eat truma now? Maybe she's pregnant, we don't know. Zogt, the Gemara, Toiveles v'oicheles adar boim. She's allowed to go to mikveh, become Torah, and now she can eat truma for 40 days. Why? De'iloi ma'abra, if she's not pregnant, Haloi ma'abra, she's not pregnant, no problem. V'ima abra, even if she is pregnant now, adar boim, until 40 days from conception, maya ba'alma hi. The fetus is considered just like water, and therefore doesn't count. And it's like it's not there almost. And so therefore she can eat truma, even though she may have a Yisrael in her body. Okay, so already the Chavos Yair in the 1600s pointed out that maybe we have to begin a conversation that there's a difference, that's 40 days. Maybe there's a difference in Halachah between before 40 and after 40. In what way? Wherever someone is on the spectrum in Halachah, they may be more lenient before the 40. So for example, maybe Rambam says it's a sikha, But maybe before 40 you say it's not a tzitcha. Maybe it's only a Isser Torah. Or maybe those who say it's a Isser Torah, they'll say after 40. But before 40 days, because we have a Gemara, maybe it's not even Asr Min HaTorah. Maybe it's only Asr Midarabana, right? So you see how there is more wiggle room here. So Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, who normally held that it's Asr Min HaTorah Taka, he held that because of this Gemara, before 40 days, it's not. It's only Issa Darabanan. And so therefore, anything that's a Tsar Gadol is going to be mutter in the first 40 days. Anything that's a Tsar Gadol, right? Come along, Reb Moshe said, absolutely not. Reb Moshe was so chomer when it came. He said, absolutely not. From the moment of conception in the woman's body, it's considered a full life. Not full life. It's a nefesh. There's no difference before and after. And he says, I'll bring you rai. And his main rai is, because are you allowed to be, let's say there's a woman who's 20 days pregnant, if we were to know that, and we're afraid she's going to lose the pregnancy. Could we be Mechal Shabbos for that 20-day embryo? Yeah. Oh, so you're allowed to be Mechal Shabbos, and then you're going to say there's no Isser? Sorry, he doesn't accept it. So this is his position. So from the little that I'm able to tell, Labav Sharabonim don't follow him on that. Before 40 days, most of the Charedim, before 40 days, are more makel. Where did this come out in a very big way? Came out when there was a big problem with Tay-Sachs in the Frum community. So they got pregnant, they knew they had the issue, so they would run to the doctor to try to get I think it's called a CVS. It's called a CVS test to see if the baby had Tay-Sachs. What was the problem? The problem is, when could you do the test? Do the test after 10 weeks of pregnancy. 10 weeks after pregnancy is already after 40 days. So there's a big metach. They were going to die. I know I spoke to doctors about this. They were coming and saying, we want the test early. I was like, no, I don't want to give you the test early because if the baby is healthy, the test could hurt the baby. And someone told me that he did it. I spoke to a doctor. He said he did the test. And then Itaka, the baby was healthy, but was born with, not with Tay-Sachs, with abnormalities because of the fact that they did the test early. And then this Frum couple sued him, is what he said. So it's like, this was a big issue at the time because the test you can't do so early. Now it's important to realize 40 days is not the way medical doctors refer to 40 days. 40 days in Halachah is 40 days from conception. The way they calculate when they say days, weeks, it goes from the last period. So you have to make a cheshbon. It's really longer. When you say halachically 40 days, it's 54 days, 53 days, 55 days. You have to make a cheshbon. Kol echad lefi shiur delay. Okay. So there you have that concept in terms of the 40. You understand here, I think this is giving a framework to understand what's happening. Okay, so now the shir is over in terms of the Torah. Now let's talk about what's going on in the country in the United States of America now, it's not Torah, so you don't have to, if you need to go, please go. And then a minute about what this all means for the law of the land. So
this last part here?
I'm going to, due to time, we're not going to have a choice. So like this. Until 1973, the Seder was in the United States of America that every state does whatever they want when it comes to abortion. And that's because abortion was treated like any other areas of code, where New York has its own laws, New Jersey has its own laws, Vermont has its own laws, many different areas. Every state was free to do what they want. And what happened was, many states had different laws. Some were more makel, some were more machmir on abortion, right? So, for example, and it was, okay, now I get to go into pratim. Thank you. Thank you very much. Came along, in 1973, the Supreme Court said this has to change. Why? Because if you read the 14th Amendment of the Constitution, you'll see there that it says that every person is guaranteed life and liberty, without any government intervention. The government has no right, no state has a right to interfere with a person's life and liberty without due process of law. That's the Lashon in the 14th Amendment, the part of the United States Constitution. And so they said, telling a woman that she can't have an abortion, you're interfering with her liberty. This is what they said. And so therefore, but states also have interests here. So they said like this. And the truth is, I'm not going to tell you the Psak Din. This is a famous case of Roe v. Wade, because later it got changed. So I'm just going to tell you the way it got changed later. Because later, in 1992 and 1993, there was another case. It's called Planned Parenthood v. Casey, which is a Pennsylvania case. And there they basically confirmed the ruling of Roe v. Wade. What did it basically say like this? It says like this. Till fetal viability, which means they said 24 weeks. 24 weeks is what a fetus, if it comes out at 23 weeks, can survive. After, it could survive with intervention, NICU, thing. So they said until the stage of fetal viability, no state could make any law to hinder a woman from getting an abortion. Doesn't matter why she wants it. You can't get in the way whatsoever. But you can make rules and regulations, but it can amount to, the language law, an undue burden. If it reaches an undue burden on the woman to have an abortion before 24 weeks, it's usher. Why? Because the Constitution says no state is allowed to do it. After 24 weeks, every state is able to do what they want. And so therefore, after 24 weeks, all states have different laws. Like Colorado is do whatever you want, right? Other states are, like New York has laws. So period. It's usher, mutter, every state. But this differentiation is only after 24 weeks. Fetal viability. Before 24 weeks, they're saying, the Supreme Court is saying that the Constitution says that no state is allowed to intervene. You can't make an undue burden for a woman to getting an abortion. A lot of people had problems with that because they said, what do you mean the Constitution says that? When it says life, liberty, that's mamish the pshat? Okay, good. So that's a legal question. That's a constitutional question. And that's the debate. So now, what happened? A lot of people are very upset about this. So over the years, as you all know, there's Muhammad. What's the Muhammad? The Muhammad is to get rid of this Supreme Court ruling. To go back to what? To go back that every state should be able to do whatever they want. Which would then mean what? That the states that are red states are going to make stringent laws against abortion, and states like New York and Colorado are going to leave it pretty much the way it is. So what happens? So what happens is many states started passing laws. So like they passed law that, well, a new science discovery that we could already detect the heartbeat through a certain type of ultrasound at 6 weeks, so therefore, no abortions at 6 weeks. Or another type of ultrasound at 12 weeks, no. Then there's another thing about fetal pain. Fetal pain, I think, at 15 weeks, and so therefore, and they say, they make a law, you can't have an abortion. What happens? It goes to federal court. The federal court says it goes against the previous Supreme Court ruling, so it gets knocked down. And so they were always ruling these are unconstitutional. Many states, precedents, yeah. Many states have trigger laws. Trigger laws is that if Roe v. Wade ever gets overturned, then automatically they're going to have a whole bunch of law, a whole system of laws that are going to come into place in this way. What are these laws again? 6-week ban. Now, all of these trigger laws that, as far as I've been able to tell, they all say, with the exception, they all have exceptions. So some say with the exception, the mother's life's at risk. Then it's an exception. Then it's going to be mutter. But other than that, it's not going to be mutter. Some make additional exceptions. They say rape and incest is going to be, if a woman gets pregnant because of rape or incest, so that would be an exception also. Mental health is also, there's variation. Between each one of these states, there's variation. So now, what happens is that the Supreme Court, for the first time, heard a case, mamish, about this noisa, whether they should overturn it or not. And there are some who think, because of recent development in the news, that they're taka going to overturn it. If they overturn it, again, what happens? What happens is states are then free to do what they want. If a state passes a law that's going to say no abortions ever, that will definitely fail. The Supreme Court's going to say that's not okay. Because the mother's life, liberty, that's mamish in the Constitution. To say that a state is going to tell a woman that she has to die, that's not going to happen. So that's not a question. But the question is more in the other issues, the mental health issues, and in the other scenarios, very distressing situations. That's where there's going to be variation. No one really knows where this is going to go in terms of state. No one knows. And so that's the thing, that's oimid, that's the issue, that's oimid ala pera. So what is, based on what we learned, what would we say about this?
Travel to another state.
Oh, so obviously there's going to be moistus that are going to help people come from one place to another place. Okay. So here's the thing. The status quo in America today is not consistent with Torah values. The idea that there's a period in time, all the way up to the 24th week in pregnancy, where a medina, a state, is not allowed to even say that they want to make regulations, that's inconsistent with it. Even if you go with the most lenient view that there's an issa derabanan, so it's mutar b'makom tsar gadol. So the idea, the value that's being conveyed, when you say that a woman has a right over her body, and therefore no one could tell her what to do during those first 24 weeks, and the laws could only be if it's about helping her with health or things like that, but nothing more than that, so that's not consistent with the Torah value. Now, I've heard some people say, yeah, but I want to paskin like the Tzitz Eliezer. I want to paskin that b'makom tsar it's mutter. And I'm afraid that in Georgia, it's going to be inconsistent with the psaka that Tzitz Eliezer. I'm sharing my own personal opinion. I hear the taina, but I first of all, The current law is not consistent with it. Sis Eliezer is matter in the 8th month, b'makom sar. You know how many states ban that? So I don't take that argument too seriously. There are many. According to Halachah, you get married to a 12-year-old girl. Which state allows that? No state allows that. Why? States should have the right to see laws according to the values that they have. I don't see a reason that for Torah to have any objection to that. So I think it actually the value. I think we lose more by having a cultural statement and a legal statement that says everything is fine in the first 24 weeks. I think what makes more sense is where there are laws that say it's not, and to say there are exceptions, and every state will be free to do what they want. Does that mean that there's going to be a Jewish woman who's going to call a Rav and she's going to get a heter for an abortion and she's not going to be able to execute it in Georgia? Yeah, it's possible that's going to happen. But to use that to say that therefore the status quo is better al pi Torah, I don't think the status quo is better al pi Torah. I think that other scenario is better al pi Torah. I think that's a little more consistent with the direction we would want to go. And again, this is all my personal opinion. You're free to agree or disagree, but ad kan b'negeh this myself.